Who do you think you are, thinking you can run an entire department? That sentence still echoes in my mind even now, nearly a year later. I can't forget the look in his eyes. Cold as ice, hard as steel. When he said those words. I used to think I was safe, respected, that I had built something lasting. But it turns out, what I built was just a ladder for someone else to climb, then kick me down without mercy. And worst of all, that person used to be a close friend of mine. I poured my youth into building that company, only to be pushed aside one day like expired merchandise. And I'm Olivia Dawson, 38 years old. I used to be the director of risk management at a financial firm in Austin, Texas, where I devoted nearly 12 years of my life. When I started, the company had about 25 employees. There were no clear departments, no standard processes, and no one really understood the role of risk in the financial system. I volunteered to start from scratch, designing every form, every report, every quarterly risk analysis meeting. I wasn't a genius, but I was hardworking, persistent, and always present when the company was in trouble. When the market was volatile, I was the one staying up all night calculating contingency plans. When the company underwent a surprise audit in 2017, I was the one who saved it from a fine that could have cost hundreds of thousands of dollars. I never needed applause or praise, I just wanted my work to be recognized, and for a long time, I believed it was. The founder of the company, Monsieur Marais, was an open-minded man who always listened and encouraged me to implement new initiatives. We weren't close, but he always gave me decision-making power and complete trust. I had the freedom to hire people, adjust budgets, and run my department. I used to think, if this company grows, I'll grow with it, as an essential part of its journey. Then Colin Brooks showed up. Colin was once the head of the credit department, a talented man but wildly ambitious. He often came to my office to discuss interdepartmental cooperation, or invited me for coffee when the chance arose. I used to admire Colin for his quick thinking and polished, calm demeanor. But looking back now, it was all part of a carefully crafted performance. Last year the company was acquired by an investment firm from New York for nearly $28 million. Franklin decided to retire early and handed the reins over to Colin, the man he believed had both business acumen and leadership skills. I still remember the night Franklin threw his farewell party. I raised a glass to toast Colin, genuinely wishing him well. I had no idea that would be the beginning of a nightmare. Within just 3 months, everything changed drastically. Colin began replacing the old leadership team, using the excuse of restructuring for operational efficiency. Veteran managers, people who had stood by me since the very beginning, were gradually transferred, demoted, or worse, silently forced out. I was one of the last to remain. One Monday morning I was called into the office. Colin sat behind a brand new desk, sunlight streaming in from the large windows making his face glow. But his words were colder than any air conditioner in the room. Olivia, we value everything you've done, but the company needs a new direction. I looked him straight in the eye. What do you mean? We're transferring you to the administration department. Your new role will be internal coordinator. I thought I misheard. You're telling me to leave the department I built from the ground up to do paperwork? Colin smiled and nodded. Administration is a critical function. I know you'll do well. I said nothing more. I knew this wasn't a suggestion. It was a demotion sentence sugar-coated in corporate language. I left the office feeling numb. I didn't cry. I didn't scream. I just felt something break inside me. As if all those years of effort, all those sleepless nights, every bold decision, had turned to dust. 3 days later I found out who replaced me. Evan James, a 26-year-old kid who had never managed anything and had no experience in financial risk. But he was hired at half my salary, and happened to be the nephew of one of the new board members. I was replaced with a cheap pawn, and the department I had poured my heart into was handed over to a child playing with a shiny new toy. I don't know what Colin thought I would do. Cry and beg? Quietly walk away? Quit out of wounded pride? No, I did none of those things. I smiled, nodded, and began quietly planning my payback, in a way he would never see coming. I used to think Colin was just ambitious. But I underestimated him. He wasn't just ambitious. He was ruthlessly greedy. After kicking me out of risk management, Colin didn't stop. It was like the company was being slowly strangled from within. A flood of internal emails came out from the CEO's office, announcing cost-cutting measures aligned with the new investment strategy. It sounded reasonable, but every line was a calculated slash into employee loyalty. First came the end of flexible work hours. Single moms like Rebecca in HR or Paul in IT, whose wife was ill, were forced into fixed schedules with no say. Longtime employees suddenly had to work overtime without pay. And salaries? Don't even dream of it. Next came the so-called compensation restructuring plan, a fancy way of saying Colin had just slashed base salaries by 15 to 20% for all mid-level employees. Quarterly bonuses, which used to be the main incentive for team leaders to maintain performance, were now turned into a flexible evaluation program, approved solely by Colin. Meaning? If he didn't like you, you wouldn't see a single cent. I remember the first all-hands meeting after the new policy was rolled out. The large conference room, lit by bright white lights, shone down on dull, heavy faces. Colin took the stage like a seasoned politician, white shirt, dark blue tie, deep voice carefully modulated. We are working toward a sustainable future, and to get there, sacrifices are needed from everyone. I sat in the third row, arms crossed, eyes fixed on his mouth. Every word was fake. The sacrifices he talked about weren't his. They weren't from the new board. They came from the hundreds of people who had stuck with this company since it was just a tiny office on the third floor of the Parkfield business complex. I turned and saw Samantha, the lead analyst, someone who had worked beside me for 6 years, pressing her lips tightly. She had just taken out a loan to buy a house, and now she had to think about selling her car to make up for the pay cut. Worse, Colin had laid off the entire internal accounting department, handing everything over to a cheap outsourcing firm in Florida. And amid all the chaos, Evan James, the 26-year-old kid Colin brought in to replace me, was receiving baffling levels of favoritism. Despite having no experience, he was showing up next to the CEO in strategic meetings, got his own private office, and even had a personal assistant. A newcomer, clueless about risk protocols, now steering a department that once handled hundreds of millions of dollars annually. The only reason I could think of? He was obedient, and more importantly, cheap. I once tried speaking with Evan to see if there was any shred of conscience in him. I walked into my old office, now reeking of instant coffee and cluttered with unfiled paperwork. "Evan," I began, "you doing okay? I noticed the reporting system's been delayed for 3 days." He looked up blankly. I'm trying to make sense of these analysis charts. Could you show me?" So I pressed my lips together. "That's your job. Colin said you'd help me if I needed it." I straightened up, locking eyes with him. "Colin said a lot of things, but if you want to keep that seat, you better learn how to stand on your own." I turned and walked out before he could respond. The truth was, I had nothing left to lose. I still worked, still showed up on time, still smiled politely in meetings. But in my mind, a plan was quietly taking shape. A plan that was detailed, calculated, and sharp as a knife honed over years. Colin thought he was the one in control, but he had no idea I had quietly mapped every move this company made for over a decade. Every process, every weak link in the system, every loyal employee he had cast aside. I knew them all. And I had a weapon even more powerful than knowledge: time. While he basked in his power and counted every dollar saved from choking the staff, I had already started my countdown. I knew I couldn't take him down overnight, but I could quietly remove each screw from the chair he sat on, until his own greed brought it crashing down. I didn't need to scream or start a rebellion. I just needed a wait for the right moment. Colin thought I would take it. He thought I would swallow my pride and keep working like an obedient puppet. But he forgot one thing. I'm not the kind to bend. Not when someone attacks the one thing I value most. My dignity. I started planning in the very first week after I was demoted. At first, all I had was anger. But the more I observed, the more I realized Colin wasn't building a solid system, he only knew how to destroy and claim. The structure I once helped build was crumbling by the day. He placed unqualified people in key roles just because they were agreeable and well-connected. A ship with no true captain. I quietly began by updating my resume and achievements, then expanded my network on LinkedIn. Every lunch break, I left the building for an hour, pretending to eat out. But really, I was at a small cafe on South Congress Street, doing online interviews. I made sure to leave no trace on the company computer, never used personal email during work hours. Every move was calculated. After 2 weeks, I received interview invitations from 3 major companies, 2 based in Seattle and 1 in Denver. All 3 were interested in my background, and just 1 week later, Crestfall Capital, an independent investment firm in Colorado, sent me an offer to become Director of Risk Strategy, with a salary twice my current one, plus unlimited year-end bonuses. I printed the email, locked it in my home safe, and began step 2 of my plan. That's when I thought of paid vacation. I still had nearly 90 days of accumulated leave after more than a decade of work. Every time I planned to take a break, some company crisis would come up, and I'd postpone. Colin didn't know, or didn't care, about that. And now, I would turn that debt into leverage. I submitted a request for 3 months off, clearly stating it was to travel across Europe to restore health and mental wellness after a prolonged period of work stress. I submitted it to the HR department, now run by a new woman named Janelle, recently hired by Colin from a failed startup. Janelle skimmed through the leave request, then gave a dry smile. 3 months? That seems a bit long, Miss Olivia. I smiled, my voice velvet soft but sharper than a blade. That's a legitimate entitlement under my employment contract. I've never taken extended leave, and currently I have no specific assignments since I was transferred to an internal support role. If needed, I can provide a breakdown of my remaining vacation days. She had no choice but to sign off. Exactly 3 weeks later, I received an email confirming the leave had been approved. I didn't celebrate. I wasn't in a hurry. I still showed up to the office every day. Still smiled and chatted with coworkers. Still played the role of harmless Olivia as if I had accepted everything. At the same time, I had one more task: train Evan, the boy Colin handpicked to replace me. I knew full well that Evan wasn't capable of handling the risk department, but I said nothing. I helped him get familiar with the system, just at a basic level. When he asked deeper questions, I smiled and said, "That part I used to handle manually, it's not documented, just observe for now, you'll get used to it." I let Evan fend for himself, let him struggle with complex reports and quantitative analyses he couldn't fully grasp. Day by day, the backlog grew larger. I still supported him, but only just enough to maintain the illusion that I was cooperating. I didn't destroy anything, I simply stood still and let the system collapse under someone unqualified. 1 month before my leave, Colin held an emergency meeting with me and Evan. He frowned when he saw the department performance charts nosedive. He asked me for the reason. I shrugged. "I'm just supporting as assigned. Evan is the one currently in charge." Colin turned to Evan, his tone cold. "We can't let this department spiral like this. You need to pick up the pace." Evan swallowed hard, nodding repeatedly. I sat there, calm as someone watching a play unfold. 2 weeks later, I sent an email reminding them of my approved leave, along with a plane ticket to Lisbon, Portugal, as an undeniable confirmation. Colin replied curtly, "Enjoy your vacation." And then the day came. I picked up my suitcase and walked out of the office with a light step. I didn't look back. I knew that in just a few weeks, everything I left behind would become a nightmare for those who thought they could easily replace me. For 3 months in Europe, I didn't answer a single call from the company. I turned off email notifications, I disappeared from the radar as if I had never existed. But I knew exactly what was happening, because a few old friends still whispered to me about what was going on behind those doors. The risk department. In shambles. Evan, so overwhelmed he had to be hospitalized for stress. Colin, desperately trying to get me back. But what happens when someone who was underestimated gains full control of their fate? They don't come back. They strike back. I used to think nothing was worse than having a decade of hard work stripped away in a single morning. But watching the department I built from ashes begin to crack layer by layer under someone who had no idea what he was doing, I realized there's a pain sharper than heartbreak. It's cold-blooded contempt. Evan James, the successor Colin installed, had once been an intern at a small health insurance company. His only notable achievement? Being the nephew of a woman who happened to be the mother of one of the new board members. With an empty resume, naive eyes, and a foolish belief that trying hard is enough, Evan stepped into a leadership role as if it were some kind of simulation game. And I, the one replaced, was assigned to train him for the final 2 weeks before my extended leave. I agreed, but only on the surface. Evan walked into my office, or rather my former office, the place where I once crafted strategy reports that reshaped the company's entire financial direction, with a face full of confident cluelessness. "Miss Olivia, I'm really grateful you're still here to support me. Colin said you'd be a great mentor." I nodded, a slow smile forming on my lips. "That's right. I'll show you everything you need to stay in that seat as long as possible." Evan didn't catch the subtext. He scribbled down every word I said, eyes glued to his laptop like a diligent student. But what I taught were the most complex analyses, multi-layered Excel formula systems, and risk assessment reports, packed with technical jargon I knew for sure he wouldn't understand. Every time Evan asked, "Could you explain this part a bit more?" I tilted my head. "Oh, that part? Just check the documents I left on Google Drive, but remember to request access from IT. I no longer have permission since..." I was reassigned. I let him get lost in a maze of processes, algorithms, and responsibilities that had never been simplified. The more he tried, the deeper he sank. I didn't lie, but I didn't tell the whole truth either. And I didn't stop him when he submitted reports late, attached the wrong charts, or sent incorrect data to high-profile clients. Each mistake was a ticking time bomb. And me, I was just the bystander, watching the clock. 2 weeks passed in chaos. Every day brought at least one frantic internal call from other departments. "Where's the analysis data? Evan sent the wrong version again. Why is the risk ratio over the threshold this quarter with no alert?" I sat nearby, typing a few polite emails, then quietly stepping back, like a by-the-book advisor. Evan started panicking after the first week. He began arriving earlier, staying later, looking exhausted with dark circles under his eyes. But instead of asking for my advice, he kept scrambling to prove himself, just as Colin had encouraged. One Friday afternoon, I was making coffee when I saw him slam a stack of papers on the table. "Damn it, this report doesn't match. Olivia, I used the exact data you mentioned, and it's still wrong." I sipped my coffee, calm as ever. "Oh, maybe you forgot to apply the unofficial asset variable. That data's in the temporarily unused folder. But it's actually still needed. You never said it was required. I thought you'd double-check the logic before submitting. After all, you're the one in charge of the department." I didn't need to scream or launch a public revenge. I just needed to make him carry the weight of the chair Colin had rushed to give him. 2 days before my leave, I happened to overhear a conversation in the conference room between Colin and Janelle, the head of HR. "Should we really let Evan continue?" Janelle's voice was clearly tense. Colin responded slowly. "He needs more time. And I don't want to make another change right now. It'll make the board think I hired the wrong guy. But Olivia isn't helping much anymore. She'll be gone soon, he'll figure it out." I pressed my lips together, turning away, trying not to laugh, until my stomach hurt. They didn't understand. The problem wasn't that Evan didn't have enough time. It was that he didn't have the foundation. And more importantly, he lacked the judgment to run a complex machine like the risk department. On my last day before the leave, I walked over to Evan and gently placed a hand on his shoulder. Good luck, Evan. The next 3 months will be a real test. Hope you can manage. He looked up at me, tired and grateful. I'll do my best. Thanks for guiding me. I simply smiled and walked away, saying nothing more. Over the next 3 months, I knew exactly what awaited Evan: a brutal storm with no life raft. And me? I'd be sitting at a riverside cafe in Florence, sipping hot espresso, reading status updates. If I even felt like it. Because when a broken department is handed to someone unqualified, and the only person who truly understands how it runs steps away, collapse is inevitable. I had just returned from my 3-month leave when I received an email from Janelle. Olivia, please come meet with Colin at 10 o'clock this morning. There are a few things to discuss. I read the line and smirked. A few things? I knew exactly what was coming. When I walked into the 5th-floor conference room, Colin was sitting cross-legged, flipping quickly through notes in a black leather notebook. He looked up with that familiar forced smile. The kind people use when they're about to lie but still want to seem polite. Olivia, welcome back. We've decided to transfer you to the External Relations Department to assist with shareholder reporting. I sat down, tilting my head. External relations? But I have no experience in that area. Colin waved it off, like it was nothing. That's all right. You're adaptable. We believe you'll adjust quickly. I smiled. In my head, only one sentence echoed. Perfect. That's exactly what I was waiting for. External relations was on the floor below. A gloomy, outdated, forgotten space. I was assigned to sit next to Tom, a man around 40, with a belly and few words. He was tasked with training me, and on the very first day, I switched on my performance mode. Olivia, have you ever worked with dividend summary sheets before? I blinked, playing innocent. Dividends? Could you explain that a bit more? I've never dealt with those. Tom looked at me like I had just landed from another planet. Oh, no problem. I'll walk you through it from the beginning. And so began a stretch of days where I sat quietly at my desk, opened documents to read, but never touched a task beyond nodding, asking vague questions, and always needing a bit more time to catch up. Evan sent the wrong budget file to the Japanese partner, exposing all the errors. They were furious and pulled the contract. I pressed my lips together, smiling faintly. True fear doesn't come from formidable enemies, but from the incompetence of your own teammates. I had written that line in a risk report 2 years ago. Now, it returned like a prophecy. In the 3rd week, I was in Venice. I sat on a gondola, watching the fiery sunset reflect on the Grand Canal. While across the ocean, Evan was likely drowning in dancing numbers and shouting emails from the executive board. Colin was probably slamming his hand on the desk, yelling into the phone as the financial report was rejected for failing to meet independent audit standards. I imagined him desperately trying to call me, but all he heard was the automated voicemail. Am currently on personal leave and unable to respond. Please contact the designated personnel during this time. Designated personnel? Evan. In the 2nd month, I went to France. Paris was always crowded and noisy, but I chose a slower pace, renting a small studio near Montmartre, where I could sit for hours on the balcony, reading books, sipping espresso, and watching people pass by. This time, it was Tom from External Relations who sent an email. Colin's furious because the entire shareholder presentation plan has been delayed due to missing data. Evan says it's because he wasn't trained properly. He might ask you to return early. I marked the email as read and closed it. In the final month, I arrived in Florence. In the early winter chill, I sat at a small eatery by the Arno River, sipping Italian noodle soup while a soft piano concerto played from the next room. A new message popped up on my phone, this time from an unfamiliar address. Colin Brooks, at rightfinancialgroup.com. Olivia, we truly need your support. Would you be willing to return early? We are open to discussing suitable terms. looking forward to your response. I leaned back and read the line twice. He, Colin, was finally bowing his head. I clicked reply and typed, word by word. Sorry, as clearly stated in my automatic response, I am not working during my leave. For any related issues, please contact the current assigned personnel. I hit send. Slowly. Deliberately. Then turned off my phone. I wanted him to know I had seen it. And chose to ignore it. The day I returned to Austin, a light rain was falling. I rolled my suitcase into the apartment, hung up my coat, poured a glass of water, and opened my laptop. My inbox had 47 unread messages from internal contacts. Mostly responses to the chaos that had unfolded while I was gone. The name Olivia Dawson appeared, repeatedly. Pulled into complaints, blame, panic. But I knew I didn't need to respond to anything. Because everything that happened was the inevitable consequence of a system lacking someone who understood it. I had left. I had cut contact. And I had let them slowly sink in, something they once believed could run without me. I walked into the office on Monday morning, the first day back after my 3-month leave, carrying a soft smile and calm eyes. No one greeted me. No one dared make eye contact. The third floor, the former heart of the risk department, now looked like a war zone after a storm. No need to ask. I could see everything had fallen apart. The smell of burnt coffee from the automatic machine, the frantic typing from confused interns, and a mountain of documents nearly toppling over on Evan's desk. He didn't even look up when I walked by. I didn't blame him, he was probably praying I'd vanish again. I headed straight to Colin's office. He stood there, no longer the arrogant executive from before. His shirt was wrinkled, tie loosened, and forehead soaked in sweat. Olivia, he rushed toward me as if I were the only lifeline left in a sinking ship. Thank you for coming back on schedule. I'd like to urgently discuss something with you. I sat down on the leather sofa, set my bag beside me and crossed my legs. About what? Colin swallowed, trying to recover his fake composure. The risk department is in trouble. We need your help during this restructuring phase. I know you handled things well before, and I'm proposing a temporary support rate of triple your current salary. Of course. Only for a few weeks. I gave a slight, cold smile. Triple? That does sound tempting. Colin nodded quickly, as if afraid I'd change my mind. Great. Can you start today? I smiled. I'll consider it, but first. Here is my resignation letter. I pulled the envelope from my bag and placed it on the table. He froze. I'll follow proper procedure. Give the full 2-week notice, but after that I'm leaving. For good. He was silent, then nodded, eyes lowered to the floor. Understood. But during those 2 weeks, I truly hope you'll support us as much as possible. That answer just gave a slight nod and left the room. During my final 2 weeks at the company, I became a silent ghost, with the label savior. I showed up on time every morning, sitting in the corner of the office, where I had the best view but was the least likely to be disturbed. My computer stayed on, an Excel file always open, but no formulas ever ran. Evan, now like a walking corpse, would occasionally wander over to ask, Miss Olivia, can I ask you about the market risk analysis? I turned to him, my voice flat. I'm restructuring the old analysis template. Please send your question by email. He nodded, then disappeared. I never replied to any messages. Other employees, even the new manager from finance, tried to approach me. But each time, I tactfully stepped back, leading them into a maze of procedures and vague references like, I'm not sure which version of the document was officially released. You should get Colin to approve. I haven't been updated on the new process, maybe check with legal? I only provide support upon request. Without a written directive, I can't intervene further. I wasn't lying, but I certainly wasn't helping. And then, the strangest part, they still paid me triple my old salary, just to have me sit there. By the end of the first week, Colin called me into the meeting room. I'm not seeing clear progress from you. I looked straight at him. Maybe I need additional access to the old systems. I no longer have admin rights. So, how long will that take? Depends on IT's response time. Probably sometime next week. Colin nodded, not daring to push further. I spent the second week packing and finalizing paperwork with my new company in Denver. Crestfall Capital had waited for me for 3 months. Now, they were ready to bring me in as Director of Risk Strategy, with my own office, my own assistant, and a team that was actually prepared to absorb real knowledge. Unlike this place, where I'd been treated like an outdated tool. On my last day, I printed 2 emails. One was the confirmation from accounting, showing the sky-high salary I had received over 2 weeks of doing virtually nothing. The other was my official offer letter from Crestfall Capital. I placed both sheets on Colin's desk. Thank you for the interesting time. I'll remember this company, but more importantly, I'll never forget how I was treated. Colin could only stare at me, his face pale, eyes wide, as if he couldn't believe I had not only survived him, but was walking away with my head held high. I walked out of the office one last time. No one said goodbye. None was needed. I knew many eyes were watching from behind. Some filled with regret. Some with admiration. Some with envy. But I didn't care. What I knew was this. The man who once thought himself clever, Colin Brooks, paid triple the salary to keep an empty shell with my name on it. And I took every advantage. From the chaos he created. A perfect ending to a game I never officially declared. On my first morning in Denver, I woke up earlier than usual. Not out of stress or pressure, but because I genuinely looked forward to starting a new chapter. The apartment I had temporarily rented overlooked the Rockies. Sunlight poured through the large windows, shining across the desk where a brand new laptop, HR files, and a Q1 strategy draft awaited. At Crestfall Capital, the fastest-growing investment firm in Colorado. New title, Director of Risk Strategy. Starting salary more than double what I earned at Wright Financial, not to mention stock options and quarterly bonuses. I stood in front of the mirror, tightened my silk tie, adjusted my blazer, and smiled at myself. In the reflection there was no trace of the woman who had once been demoted without remorse, replaced by someone incompetent. Now there was Olivia Dawson, the woman who returned from the ashes with a plan no one had seen coming. Crestfall wasn't like Wright Financial. No compromises. No hollow leadership or blatant favoritism. On my first day, the CEO personally introduced me during the strategy meeting. No empty slogans, no one asked, "Are you settling in okay?" Because they already knew, I was hired for my actual capabilities. I had a dedicated team of 6, each experienced and ready to implement the risk assessment tools I had once proposed but never saw come to life at my old company. During our first meeting, I stood before the digital board and presented the plan to integrate a real-time market volatility tracking system. The room was dead silent. When I finished, a director at the end of the table was the first to applaud. Then everyone joined in. "We've been waiting for someone like you for a long time," the CEO said, walking up to me. "You're not just the right fit, you're exactly what we need." While I was busy rebuilding a department to actual professional standards, back in Austin, Wright Financial was crumbling by the day. Samantha, still in touch, couldn't hide her exasperation during our short calls. "Colin hasn't released the final quarterly audit report. The shareholders are pressuring for mass layoffs. Evan has resigned, completely collapsed. They hired an external audit firm, but it flagged major errors from last quarter onward. I heard the parent company is considering selling the entire southern branch for less than half of what they originally paid." I listened to every word. I didn't laugh. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Because that downfall wasn't caused by me. It was the inevitable result of arrogance, greed, and the failure to judge people correctly. One Thursday afternoon, while on a business trip to San Francisco with the strategy team, I happened to see Colin walking out of an office building. he didn't see me. He wore a plain white shirt, worn and tired. Nothing like the powerful figure he once was. He looked like a man desperately clinging to the last remnants of a faded reputation. I stood from a distance, never approaching. I didn't need his apology. I didn't need any explanations. I had won, and my victory didn't need to be shouted. 8 months after leaving the old company, I was invited to speak at the statewide financial conference, a major event for leaders in the investment industry. On stage, under the bright lights, I spoke about rebuilding an effective risk department, about detecting discrepancies in systems and addressing them before they became crises. I never mentioned Right Financial. There was no need. But those who knew, understood. When I stepped off the stage, someone rushed up to shake my hand. "You're Olivia Dawson? I've heard your story. You're a legend." I simply smiled. I didn't need to be a legend. I just needed to do the right thing. And let the rest speak for itself. Now, I still wake up early every morning, but no longer to face a draining day or brace myself against disrespect. I wake up to lead, to build. To prove a simple, bitter truth. Never underestimate a woman who knows her worth. Right Financial didn't collapse because I left. It collapsed because they thought I wasn't worth keeping. Olivia's story is a powerful reminder of a harsh but necessary truth. When people underestimate your value, don't prove them wrong with words, let your actions speak louder. Betrayed, demoted, and replaced by someone unqualified, Olivia didn't react with anger but with strategy and quiet resolve. She left at the right moment, secured a better job, and while those who underestimated her struggled with the wreckage, she rose. In real life, sometimes the greatest victory is walking away, without looking back. What do you think about how Olivia handled the situation? Would you have done the same in her place? Leave a comment below, and don't forget to follow the channel for more powerful real-life stories about family, career, and resilience.